everyone. Welcome back to the deep dive. We always love it when you send in interesting material, and this time, wow, you've really outdone yourselves. The stuff about the mind-body connection, how deeply linked they are, it's really got us thinking.
It is fascinating, isn't it? I mean, the idea that your mind can have such a strong impact on your physical self, it's potentially a game changer for a lot of people. And it's not just about, you know, thinking happy thoughts. It goes much deeper than that.
Yeah, that's what's so intriguing is like this realization that what's happening in our heads has this very real, very direct impact on our bodies. It's powerful stuff. So for this deep dive, we really want to dig into the most important stuff from what you sent, the core principles about how this mind-body connection actually works. And then, of course, what does it all mean for you? How can you actually use this knowledge?
Right, because we don't want to get bogged down in all the technical details. We want to make this practical, something you can apply. So let's start with this, I guess you could call it a foundational principle that keeps popping up in the material. And that is your body, it tends to obey what your mind believes. And this isn't just about the thoughts you're aware of, what's on the surface. It's also about the beliefs that are running in the background, all those unconscious things that are shaping your reality.
Okay, so I'm already hooked. So it's not as easy as just trying to force ourselves to be positive all the time. There's a deeper level we need to address.
Exactly. The material refers to something called the law of consciousness.
Hmm.
And it basically means this: you are only truly subject to the things that you actually hold in your mind. In other words, anything outside of you, anything at all, it only has power over you if you believe it does. And this power, it's actually described as a form of energy combined with your will to believe.
Wow, that's a pretty big idea. So if you really truly believe that something can hurt you, you're almost giving it permission to do so on an energetic level.
That's the implication. And to add a bit more context here, the material mentions something called the map of consciousness, which seems to lay out different levels of energy or force. And it points out that reason, our capacity for reason, it registers at a higher level on this map, and therefore it has more influence than, say, the physical body, which registers at a lower level. So what this suggests is that your mental beliefs, your understandings, they're actually more powerful in shaping your physical experience than just your physical form alone.
See, this is what I find so fascinating. This idea that, in a way, our minds are more energetically influential than our actual bodies. And this leads us right into how negative beliefs can affect us, right?
Absolutely. The material really emphasizes how easily we tend to accept negative beliefs, especially if we're already carrying around some negativity within us. And it contrasts this with a more, I guess you could say, resilient mindset, a mind that's quick to reject negative thoughts, to sort of say, nope, that's not true for me, refusing to buy into those common negative assumptions.
And that example about colds being contagious, that really stood out to me. Can you explain how that fits into all of this?
Sure. It's used as a prime example of how a belief can actually lead to a physical outcome. So let's say someone is carrying around some unconscious guilt, or maybe fear. They might, on some level, believe they deserve to be sick. And this belief, this hidden belief, it aligns perfectly with the common idea that colds are easily spread. So what happens? Their body, being totally in tune with what the mind believes, it goes ahead and manifests the cold. And it becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy, this loop of fear and belief feeding into each other. But the important thing to remember is, if those deeper negative energies are dealt with, if they're released, well, then that fearful belief about getting sick, it loses its power.
So it becomes less about dodging germs all the time and more about creating an internal environment that's less susceptible to getting sick in the first place. That's a really interesting perspective. Now, the material also talks about thoughts as actually having energy, right?
Yes, exactly. It describes a thought as an actual energy pattern. And the more attention you give to that thought, the more energy you focus on it, well, the greater its power becomes to actually manifest physically. And this brings us to what the material calls the paradox of much so-called health education.
The paradox. Okay, now I'm really curious. Tell me more about that.
Well, it's this idea that fear-based health warnings, the kind we often see in the media, like think about all the coverage of things like swine flu outbreaks. Well, it suggests that this type of information can actually backfire. Instead of protecting people, it might actually bring about the very thing they fear. And that's because by constantly dwelling on the potential danger, people are actually cultivating a negative mental space. They're giving energy to the possibility of it happening.
It's like we're accidentally programming ourselves to experience what we're most afraid of. And this ties into that whole idea of an energy body, right?
Exactly. The material introduces this concept of an energy field that surrounds and reflects your physical body. And it basically says that the patterns within this energy body, the patterns shaped by your thoughts and intentions, they ultimately guide your physical body on a very fundamental level.
And there's even a connection mentioned to quantum physics, right? How does that fit in?
Right. It draws a parallel with findings in subatomic quantum physics, where they've actually shown that the act of observation can influence the behavior of subatomic particles. So the implication is that your conscious and unconscious observation of your own body, of your health, it can have a similar influence on your physical state.
Okay, we're definitely getting into some pretty deep stuff here. But then the excerpts go on to give some clinical evidence, and that's where it gets really convincing.
It is, isn't it? That study they mentioned, the one with the placebo injections and women expecting their periods to start early, it's a perfect example of the law of consciousness in action. Even though they were given a simple saline solution, over 70% of these women experienced those early premenstrual symptoms simply because they believed they would. I mean, that right there shows you the incredible power of expectation, the fact that your body can literally respond to what you believe is going to happen.
That's pretty amazing. The
Yeah.
power of expectations is huge. And then there's the research on multiple personality disorder. That was really interesting.
Yeah, the most remarkable thing about that is how drastically the physical body can change depending on which personality is dominant at the moment. I mean, we're talking about documented changes in things like brainwave patterns, handedness, pain thresholds, even things like allergies, eyesight, and pressure within the eyes can differ between different personalities within the same body. And it all happens so fast. It really highlights how profound and how rapid the impact of belief can be on physical reality. You know, one personality believes they have an allergy, boom, it appears. Another personality takes over who doesn't hold that belief, poof, the allergy vanishes.
It's almost like the body is this mirror reflecting whatever the dominant mind believes to be true at any given moment. And this isn't just limited to people with multiple personalities, right? This applies to everyone.
Absolutely. The material mentions how hypnosis can have similar effects on ordinary people. Allergies can appear or disappear just through suggestion. There's that example of someone under hypnosis reacting to artificial roses as if they were real and causing an allergic reaction. It just goes to show how powerful our beliefs can be, even when they're sort of implanted externally, to override our natural physical responses.
This really makes you rethink that whole purely biological view of health, doesn't it? And this leads us to the work of Sir John Eccles, which was really interesting.
Oh, absolutely. His conclusion that the mind controls the brain, not the other way around, is a major point. And remember, he was a Nobel Prize winner. He actually used the analogy of the brain being like a radio receiver, picking up thought waves from the mind. This is a good way to visualize the relationship, right?
Yeah.
The brain becomes the instrument through which the mind's intentions are translated into physical and neurological processes.
And then the research on how we initiate movement and the effects of meditation, they kind of back this up, don't they?
They do. You see, they now understand that voluntary movement actually originates in a part of the brain that's closely linked to intention, not just the motor cortex. So that suggests that the mind is involved in initiating action before the signal even gets to the muscles. And then there's that fascinating research by Dr. Richard Davidson on meditation, which shows that what you choose to focus your mind on, in his research it was compassion and loving kindness, can actually change your brain activity. It can even change the physical structure of your brain, leading to things like increased positive emotions and a wider sense of awareness. So it's like what you hold in mind can literally reshape your neuroanatomy.
So there's this constant feedback loop happening between mind and body, but the mind seems to be the primary driver. And the excerpts then go on to explain how this impacts all the different systems in our bodies, right?
That's right. It emphasizes that both your conscious and unconscious beliefs can have a really broad effect on all your bodily systems. We're talking about things like how your body reacts to food, what triggers allergies, the experience of menopause and menstrual cycles, your susceptibility to infections, and basically any illness that has any connection to your beliefs and your underlying stress levels. It's really quite far-reaching.
It definitely sounds like our mental state plays a much bigger role in our health than we might realize. And that story about Norman Cousins, that really brings this all home, doesn't it?
It does. His recovery from that severe arthritic condition just through laughter and vitamin C, it's a powerful real-world example of all this in action. What's really interesting here is that the laughter seemed to act as a way of releasing emotional tension and negative thoughts. It was like a letting go of all that pent-up stuff. And this release of negative mental and emotional energy, well, it had a direct positive impact on his physical health. It even seemed to have a pain-relieving effect.
So it wasn't just the vitamin C doing all the work. It was that shift in his internal state, that letting go facilitated by laughter, that seemed to be the real catalyst for his healing. And this brings us to that whole idea of our own disease proneness. And the material has some very direct questions for you, the listener, to consider.
It does. It's like a self-assessment designed to help you examine your own potential vulnerability to illness. It asks you to look at your typical thought patterns and beliefs. Things like, do you worry excessively about your health? Are you fascinated by diseases? Do you tend to believe in all sorts of environmental dangers or food-related risks? Do you just accept hereditary predispositions without questioning them? Even things like enjoying violent media, they're all highlighted as potential indicators of a mindset that might be more inclined to manifest illness. It's pretty eye-opening.
It's like those questions are encouraging us to look in the mirror and examine our own underlying anxieties and negative assumptions about our bodies and the world around us. So let's say we recognize some of these tendencies in ourselves. What's the path to change? How do we shift things?
The core message here is that if you want to change your body, you need to change your thoughts and feelings. And that means actively releasing negative beliefs and the stress that comes with negative emotions. It's those emotions that give energy to those beliefs that keep them alive.
And this process of letting go, it's not just about like shoving those negative thoughts aside when they pop up, is it? It's something more.
Right, it's about going deeper, releasing that underlying emotional charge that's connected to those thoughts and beliefs. And it's about becoming aware of and counteracting the negative influences that come at us from the outside world, but also from our own deeply ingrained belief systems. That example of fearing various foods and environmental things leading to what they call environmental paranoia, it really illustrates this.
Yeah, it's like this picture of our world shrinking as our fears expand. It's kind of absurd when you look at that list of things people have been afraid of throughout history, all the things that have caused so much worry and anxiety.
Exactly. We've gone from worrying about pollens to food additives to electromagnetic waves. It just goes on. And sometimes it gets to the point where people end up isolating themselves, trying to create these perfectly controlled environments, and they basically become prisoners of their own fearful minds. The key realization, and the material really drives this point home, is that what is held in mind tends to manifest. The problem isn't the external world itself, it's our internal beliefs about that world.
And that personal story about the poison ivy is a perfect example of this shift in perspective, isn't it?
It is. You have this individual who had always believed they were allergic to poison ivy, and then once they let go of that underlying belief, they stopped reacting to it. It's like it wasn't the plant itself that was the problem, it was the mind's programming. And what's really interesting is that muscle response testing, or kinesiology, where they assess muscle strength in response to different stimuli, well, it actually showed a reversal of the muscle weakness associated with poison ivy after this person let go of that belief. So you're seeing a very real, measurable change in the body's response.
This whole idea of surrendering those internal beliefs, it seems to be a really central theme here. So how does this letting go approach compare to other more, I guess, mainstream ways of dealing with stress?
The material makes a very clear distinction. It suggests that many of the popular stress management techniques, things like aromatherapy, exercise, acupuncture, biofeedback, they're all great, but they mostly address the symptoms of stress. They're dealing with the consequences, not necessarily the root cause. And that root cause, it lies in the content of your consciousness, your thoughts, and all those suppressed emotions.
So while those methods might offer temporary relief, they might not actually lead to a permanent change in our underlying perceptions or our emotional patterns.
That's the idea. They can be time-consuming, they can be expensive, and sometimes they're just not practical to use in the moment. But more importantly, they don't necessarily lead to a true shift in your level of consciousness, your personality, or your overall life circumstances. The argument is that surrender is a much more effective approach, especially for chronic illnesses that are related to stress, because it addresses the underlying emotional causes directly. And sometimes, this can even lead to spontaneous healing.
So it's about a much deeper transformation, not just managing symptoms. But what about those cases where people do all this inner work, but they're still dealing with an illness?
The material acknowledges that there can be other factors at play, what they call unknown factors, such as karmic proclivities. And in those situations, the suggested response is to surrender even your desire to control the outcome, to remain open to further inner exploration about the meaning and the origin of the illness. It describes deep surrender as a state where you no longer need physical healing to happen in a specific way or on a specific timeline. It's about finding peace with the situation, regardless of what happens on a physical level, because all aspects, physical, mental, and spiritual, are being addressed.
So it's about finding a sense of acceptance and inner peace no matter what the physical outcome might be. That's a really powerful message to consider.
It is. It suggests that true healing involves much more than just the physical body. It's about addressing the whole person.
Well, this has been a truly insightful deep dive into the mind-body connection. I think the key takeaway here, and hopefully this resonates with you listening, is how profoundly our minds can shape our physical well-being. It's a much deeper connection than many of us
I
realize.
agree. The power of beliefs, both the ones we're aware of and the ones hidden beneath the surface, to influence our physical reality, it's a powerful theme that runs throughout all this material.
So as you go about your day, take some time to reflect on all this. Think about how these principles might apply to your own life, to your own experiences and beliefs about your health and your overall well-being. It's a question worth exploring on your own personal journey of understanding this amazing connection between your mind and your body. Thanks for diving deep with us today.